Okay, Shalom Aleichem everybody. Things are a little bit humbly with family matters, so that's why I wasn't here yesterday. And if you notice that the sheets are not numbered properly or the sections are not numbered properly, that's right. Because it was kind of like patched together some of last minute due to certain circumstances beyond my control, but I hope they'll still be understandable and basically in order, and maybe the second edition will be better. Okay. So the topic is Emuna, and ideally I would see the transcripts of the shiurim that were given yesterday by Rabbi Schoolmaker and the shiur that's going to be given today by Rabbi Schneider. I think that there was another speaker yesterday also, by Wolf. So I was not aware of those classes, so there might be some overlap. Feedback's important. If we're spending 10, 20 minutes on something that was already covered thoroughly, so don't be shy, raise your hand, say that was already covered. Okay. So my primary goal in this particular shiur is, which is I think why I was slated originally to go first, but I wasn't able to make it yesterday, is to somewhat from a more philosophical level, if we could use that term, from a theological level, and more fundamentally, that was that tongue twister I put on the sheet, how fundamentally fundamental are the fundamentals of faith. That's not related to how many peppers could either pepper pick, whatever. So we're going to try to discuss some very important inyanim, and it's on the one hand a very exciting topic, on the other hand a very frightening topic, because much is at stake, and it's really the ikar shebikarim. I wish I could have pulled it from the shelf, but one of my favorite svarim, even though it's not like something you curl up with and just read, you have to really study it, is, I mentioned it before, and I was supposed to mention it a little bit on Shabbos. It's called The Handbook of Jewish Thought by Rabbi Kaplan, who was an Anak Sheba'anakim, a giant of giants in terms of how much he knew and his power to be able to present it in a straightforward way, even for the masses. So he has many chapters on many, many fundamental topics, and in his topic on belief in God, so he introduces it with the following, I think even just 2-line paragraph. The book is written kind of like in bullet format, like sentence, paragraph, broken up into numbers. He said, belief in God is the fundamental that everything rests on, without which everything is meaningless and nonsense. Now that's not an exact quote because I don't have it in front of me. But it just informs us as to what is at stake in terms of Emuna, not that belief in God is the only belief that's in the list of beliefs, which we're going to try to address today, and how that list came about, and so on and so forth. But it's really the fundamental of everything. And again, to paraphrase Rabbi Kaplan, it's the fundamental of all existence. To be sure, not everyone in the world believes, but they're basically living a life not only void of meaning, but void of anything. I remember I was learning that a little bit with the students, so we were pilpering a little bit. That's exactly what he meant. Okay, so let's begin with, from my perspective at least, with a great humility, but also an excitement to be able to frame and study a very, very, very central topic. Okay. So we start with maybe this was already discussed before, but the very definition of belief. So I think as one of the Rabbanim said, Lazeh yesh internet. So I was able to type in quickly and get a nice cut and paste on belief without having to actually literally cut and paste the dictionary. So here we have 3 definitions of belief. This is actually one subsection, but forgive the double M there. That's the only thing that I wrote, okay. So this is from the Merriam-Webster's online dictionary. The bold is my own, okay, we'll see why I bolded it. So to believe, or again, obviously you could speak about the verb to believe and the noun belief, but now we'll just treat them in a similar way, so this actually should be the definition of to believe, not belief, okay? So number 1, to accept something as true, genuine, or real. One of the reasons I came in a little earlier to Yeshiva today is because I have a book at home that Baruch Hashem I had this was a basement course in Stoner College on, which is really how the sheet was put together, but I had to modify it for the present year. So one of my rebbeim, Rabbi Bleich, or Yehuda Bleich, or J.B. Bleich, who writes and continues to write, wrote and continues to write beautiful Svarim. So a master of halacha, also a big wordsmith, able to present the difficult topics in a very straightforward way. On the shelf you have a few of his volumes called Contemporary Halachic Problems, but he was also very into Jewish philosophy and wrote a lot about it, especially the Ralbag. And he also put out a very beautiful volume. It was a teacher's dream, because he not only has very great concepts spelled out, but he also has sources translated into English. So it was made for a college class, actually. He translated many of the excerpts of the Rishonim that hadn't yet been translated into English, because he was teaching a college class in some secular university and he needed English text. So that's the way that came about. But he's a religious man, not just a scholar, and not just talking theoretically about Ikar Emuna, but trying to guide his readers in arriving at belief. The book is called With Perfect Faith, the 13 Principles of Faith in Jewish Thought, something like that. So I thought they had it here on the shelf. I know they did, but I couldn't find it. So I have it at home, but it's in the catacomb somewhere. I couldn't find it. I thought I'd be able to review. So any mistaken quotes from that sefer are on my own, because I didn't get a chance to actually check it up inside. So this idea of trying to crystallize what we mean by to believe was first arrived at in my study of that book, meaning for me. And he defines to believe as to hold to be true. Okay, so that's very similar to what the dictionary says here, to accept something as true, genuine, or real. We'll see why I'm making a big deal about it. Then the next definition, words are the way you take them to mean, is to have a firm conviction as to the goodness, efficacy, or ability of someone or something, such as believe in exercise. Now, exercise not Ikar Emuna, but they're developing a very important concept here, and this is not something we're going to explore really today, that there's belief that, and there's belief in. To use Hebrew words, so one might refer to as Emuna, and one might refer to as Bitachon. One could have Emuna without Bitachon, but one can't have Bitachon, if it's a real Bitachon, without Emuna. Emuna we could translate as belief, Bitachon we could translate as reliance. If one speaks about Am Boteach B'Hashem, that means, well, it's premised on the fact that I believe He exists, that He exists, and I also believe in Him, that He is a reliable being and guides my life. So that is a very, very important talk, and the Chazon Ish wrote a sefer called Emuna Bitachon, and analyzing the interrelation between those two. So this second definition, to have a firm conviction as to the goodness, efficacy, or ability of someone or something. So again, you can believe in exercise, but that's not really premised on Ikar Emuna. Relying on the exercise. Okay, so the first definition is fundamental in terms of that it's something that we hold to be true. The second can be used in a more general way, that I believe in protein, that's a good food, but that's not really our topic. But it also can be our topic because to believe in God, not just that God exists, to believe in the value of Torah, not just that Torah is true, is another madrega, another level. And finally, the third, which is not what we're trying to get to, but nonetheless is sometimes the way people use the word, to hold an opinion or to think. So, I believe Trump is a good president. I believe he's not a good president. Right? I believe that exercise is something you should spend 2 hours in a day. I believe that you should not exercise at all. This is not our topic, because our topic now is to explore Ikar Emuna, which are belief systems that, to some extent, the whole world and certainly the Jewish people, are meant to get to the level of, to hold to be true. Not just vaguely, if someone says, I believe Trump is a good president, so when we put a gun to their head and put them to a lie detector to see whether they're lying or telling the truth, are they going to get like all excited about that? Because the way they said it was very vague. It wasn't to hold to be true in the sense of absolute truth. It seems to be the way things are. But that's not what we're trying to reach by Ikari Emuna. We're trying to reach at least close to, if not absolutely, 100% certainty. To hold to be true is much more of a powerful statement than to hold an opinion. In our opinion, we believe that. So that's a lot of time just means, I think. Not 100% sure, but I think. So of course, Emuna is meant to reach the higher level, the first definition, to hold to be true. Not just that's currently where the winds seem to be blowing in my mind. That's much vaguer. Okay, so that's where we're headed, and hopefully later we'll try to explore a little more about an important nafkamina of that, of hold to be true. It's certainly more than a thought, and it's certainly kal v'chomer more than just thinking about. I could think about pink elephants, but not believe that they exist. And we'll see why, again, theologically and philosophically, but that's a very, very important distinction. To think about is certainly not the same as to believe that or to believe in. Okay. So the next step, just to highlight that idea and that distinction between a more vague kind of connection to a concept and an absolute connection to a concept. So, I'm not saying you can't have good shiurim without a good Hasidic shemaisa, but sometimes it's a nice spice. So let's relate a story that I might have seen this in the Hasidic Tales of Rav Zevin, I'm not sure. So one of the great Hasidic masters was Rav Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, known as the Heilige Berditchev. Okay, my wife happened to pick up a book from Hefker that was about Rav Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. She couldn't put it down. Okay, he was a very saintly man, and also he was a great Gaon. He was a great Gaon in learning and in hashkafa, besides all the miracles they told him. Okay. So, Rav Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, as is well known, maybe well known, was a third generation Hasidic master, if you will, from the Baal Shem Tov. He was a member of the Chavraya Kadisha, that they refer to it as, the Hasidic giants who were Talmidim of the Dov Ber, I think his name was, of Mezrich, the Mezrich Magid, who in turn was a student of Baal Shem Tov, together with his colleagues, the Alter Lubavitch, the Baal Tanya, and many other greats. Brzezinski, Zusha, Lanapoli, so on and so forth. No one should get any mistaken impression that I know too much about Hasidus, but enough to tell a Hasidic tale. So, Rav Levi Yitzchak's father-in-law apparently was a Misnabi. Those who know a little bit about the development of Hasidus, that it didn't develop so smoothly. That more classic, traditional Jews didn't look kindly at the Hasidic movement. They thought its innovations in thought and practice to some extent were going to lead to the destruction of Jews. Okay? So, not a topic for now, but Tzemach Tzedek Lubavitch supposedly said that we're happy secretly that the Groa bumped us over the head, because if not for him, Hasidus would have gone off the derech.
Where's he putting the same?
Yeah, well, you'll Google it. This is not our topic for now. I think Lubavitch has denied they ever said that. Okay. Okay. The point is, there was a point and a counterpoint, and then there was a certain in the middle, and that's ultimately what happened to Hasidus. And then a lot of classic models went into Hasidic practice, and a lot of Hasidic ideas went into classic practices. And now they're studying Tanya and Ponovich, and the Hasidim are learning Reb Chaim Briskers. Okay, so I guess not a topic for now. You'll speak to the scholars, maybe Rabbi Geber, about the wild and crazy times of the Advent of Hasidus. But the point is, for our purposes, the related to Berditchev had a father-in-law who was not so happy that his son-in-law, even though he knew he was quite a scholar, that's probably why he picked him as a son-in-law, but he wasn't so happy that he was a follower of Hasidic Rebbe's. So he, when he returned from an intense study by the Mizritcha Magid, so he told him, no, whatever they called him, Leivik. He said, what did you learn already by the Magid? What did you learn? You learned Shas, you learned Bavli, Yerushalmi, you learned the Al Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. What did you learn already by the Mizritcha Magid? So he told him in Yiddish, I'll say it in English. He said, I learned, so he said it this way. He said, I learned to know that there's a God. So his father-in-law laughed at him. And he said, you learned to know that there's a God? He said, come, Sprinze, could you come here? Sprinze was the household help. He says, Sprinze, the Gleibst and the Eibishter, you believe in God? So Sprinze said, brother, Gleib the Eibishter, of course I believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How could you not believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So he says, no, what's the difference between you, Leivik? You spent so much time at Mizritcha Magid, you could have learned, Shas and Poskim and a little more instead. The maid also believes in God. So, without missing a beat, he said, she believes, I know. So just to use that story of, again, and quoting the Webster's Dictionary with those two definitions of belief, we're trying to get to the level of to accept something as true, genuine, or real on the highest level possible, where it's impossible any other way in your mind. Not currently, this is where I'm going with now. To be down the Kaskus, because the Sprinzer had, a certain high level, but it was nowhere near the level of what Lev Yitzchak was. So whatever study that was, whatever he was studying the Mizritcha Magid, that led him to the degree where it was a much more intense belief than the commoner would have. Okay. The Mechilta, which is the Medrash Halacha, there are two kinds of Midrashim, the Midrash Halacha and the Midrash Agada. The Midrash Halacha primarily deal with halakhic analysis of Sukkim. Those, from Gemara, we spoke to this a little bit in the shir we gave on Shabbos at night, that they deal with hermeneutical principles and the analysis, the Shavak, Kal V'chaimer. So you have the Mechilta, Sefra, Sefrei, etc. It doesn't have as much material on the Ashkafic ideas of Judaism. The Midrash Agada, mostly about Ashkafa, with a little bit halakha. But once in a while, the Mechilta has on Ashkafic ideas too. So one of them, a very famous one, is on Parshas B'Shalach, where the Mechilta says, we'll just excerpt a little bit, that highlights the centrality of Emuna. It's on the Oz Yashir. So right before Oz Yashir, it says, Vayaminu B'Hashem of Moshe Amda. So there, the Mechilta extols the virtue of Emuna, Shekein Matzina B'Aviseinu, Sheb'schar Emuna She'aminu Aviseinu B'Hashem Zachu B'Shar Saleim Roch HaKodesh. And the reward of the belief that they believed in God, here it's not just that God exists, but actually relied on Him and believed in Him. So they were Zochet Nevuah, the prophecy, and they were all able to say Shira together. Then the Mechilta continues, maybe we'll just say it outside to save time. You see that Avraham Avinu got Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba as a result of his belief in God, as it says, V'emin B'Hashem Shavel Tzedakah. You also find that because the Jews believed in God in Mitzrayim, Vayamein Ha'am, so they went out of Mitzrayim. And finally, coming toward the end, V'chein Atamotzei Shein HaGolius Miskanso, Sel V'schar Emuna. That only because of belief, so that will lead to the merit of going out of the final exile. Quotes a pasuk in Shir HaShirim, paraphrasing the pasuk with an extra layer of meaning, Tashuri me Rosh Amanah, that you'll be able to see into the distance, meaning to get to Geula as a result of the Emuna. And finally, which many have the custom to say when we put on tefillin, Uchsiv ve'rastich li la'olam, ve'rastich li b'emuna. Those who've been in my share for a while know I like to quote the line from Rabbi Soloveitchik about the great romance. So the great romance with God first begins with belief. So Eresin, right, is the marriage bond. Ve'rastich li b'emuna. that when the human being, and more specifically the Jewish people, have God in their minds constantly, so there's this connection, and there's this relationship, which of course throughout Tanakh is compared to the marriage relationship. So Emuna is great. It's not just a nice idea, but it's the fundamental of everything and leads to great, great reward. Okay. So Baruch Hashem, we're learning yeshiva, we a lot of times speak about, so what's the nafkamina? So what's the practicality? What's this? Let's say I don't believe in one of the Ikar Emuna, or let's make it a little, one could perhaps more intuitively appreciate Rabbi Kaplan's line that belief in God is the fundamental of everything, without which everything is meaningless. So let's say I'm going to pick one of the Ikar Emuna and I'll take it out of my list of that which I hold to be true. So let's say I hold that the Torah was made up. That's one of the Ikar Emuna, the Torah was not made up. Or let's say we hold that everyone should have their subjective ways to serve God. You serve God this way, I serve God that way. It's all good. Multi-religions. Or let's say Rabbi Kwasin is a dry humor, as I told the boys different times, that he met someone who was holding, I think he said that's a Rabbi Kwas joke. Hard to say, whether Rabbi Kwas, whether he was telling it was a joke or really. They met someone holding a lulav, and instead of an esrog, he was holding a guava. So they pointed out to him, he said, "Sir, I'm not sure if you realize that that's not a citron that you're supposed to use as a guava. It does it for me." So let's say I had a conversation with him, and he said, "But that's not what it says in our traditions." He said, "Yeah, but I hold you serve God the way you want to." So in a sense, he's denying the binding nature of Torah, either the revelation of it, etc. So let's say someone doesn't believe in it. What, does it have consequences? So the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Perek Yud, Mishnah Aleph, the astute observer will realize that this is the 10th Perek in the Mishnayos, but it's the 11th Perek in the Gemara. So don't sue me. I wrote Yud because I was putting in the Nakudas based on the Wikipedia Mishnayos. So once in a while, the Prokim in the Mishnayos are at a different order than the Prokim as presented in the Talmud Bavli. Throw it as a riddle for what are all the others. Okay. It's all the same text, it's just a matter of the order of the Prokim. ואלו שאינם חלק לעולם הבא, האומר אין קריאס המסר מן התורה ואין תורה מן השמיים ואפיקורס. The definition of apikoros is a very vague one. But now let's define it as someone who denies that God exists. That's the way the Rambam seems to define it. So what do you have over here? Someone who denies the resurrection, someone who denies heavenly Torah. That was an inspiration that I gave about the Guava. Okay, and someone who denies God exists. So what does it say about him? Doesn't call him just a Russia, doesn't call him that maybe you can't make him part of Armenian. It says, Ein lo chelek olam haba. So that's pretty harsh. Ein lo chelek olam haba. So to be clear, depriving someone from the afterlife and eternal reward is not something that's reserved only for violations of proper beliefs. Have someone who embarrasses someone in public, you have other teachings like that, and of course tshuva could work for everything. Just because someone sinned in a certain way doesn't mean he's doomed. The forfeit is olam haba. But the Gemara doesn't say that someone who doesn't put on tefillin doesn't get olam haba. The Gemara doesn't say that someone who's machal Shabbos doesn't get olam haba. So if the Gemara says about having improper beliefs and not just improper actions, forfeits olam haba, so obviously it is a tremendous nafkamina, tremendous implication to that. Okay, the Rambam and the Ravid, I hope to get to a little bit later. It should have been in a later section as part of the hodgepodge I warned about earlier. Yeah.
So if we're a dietist, then someone who doesn't believe but still acts according to the Torah would not inherit olam haba. But couldn't we say that a person's true beliefs are measured not by what his stated beliefs are, but what his active beliefs are?
Apparently not. Interesting. Again, much has been written about this. This is a very popular topic, especially in universities and scholarship. They attribute to a certain scholar in the 1800s, since it's not an absolute attribution, so maybe I won't quote the name, it's not to be inaccurate, that we are a religion of deed and not creed, and it doesn't really matter so much as to what you believe in, just a matter of what you do. And I think when you read the Psukim and the Tanakh and the Torah Shebal Peh and all the Rishonim, as part of our tradition, we see that that's an absolute incorrect statement. In YU circles, they sometimes would have an insult for people who would sometimes would be asked to say, I see you put on tefillin every day, but do you believe in God? And he says, no. He says, so why do you put on tefillin every day? He says, because I believe it's important to have social cohesion, and you have to be part of a group, and it allows for a meaningful kind of life. So I put on tefillin every day, and I keep Shabbos and everything, but I don't believe in anything I'm doing is leading to eternity. So they call that orthoprax. I don't know if you heard that term before. Practicing orthodoxy, but not believing in orthodoxy. So that's not on the earth. We hold that that's a tremendous, tremendous flaw that leads to forfeiting the Rambam. Yeah.
But doesn't this Mishnah say someone who says these things as opposed to someone who believes these things isn't saying already in Maisa?
I must tell you, every year I teach this in a certain class in a seminary in a different context. I'm focusing more on Chiyas Mason and the afterlife. I never noticed that diuk. It's an excellent diuk, but it's not the way it's classically understood. A lot of times, ha'omer means ha'choshev. You could write a paper on that. You could search throughout Shas where it says ha'omer. Sometimes it means ha'choshev. This is it's highly difficult because if you're going to take your diuk to the extreme, so he could say it to himself also. He doesn't have to say it to others. But it's not.
It could be usher but not getting rid of your own hum. I don't know. Whatever.
I hear what you're saying. I don't think anyone interprets it that way. I think it's valid to say depending on the context. But I don't think
But there's also the principle of a Jew being able to do something for ulterior motives, such that with enough time it'll become genuine. So if a person does something for the sake of social cohesion, for example, and not belief, how does he?
So when he asks a spiritual advisor who says, what should I do? Should I give up the tefillin? So he'll probably advise him. He said, no, keep up the tefillin. If you don't mind, I'd like to have a chavrusa with you. And the Aryeh Kaplan and the Eish Discovery Seminar and the Sefer Korim and the Moreh Ruchim and Chassidish thought, then maybe the Emuna will be ignited. Mm-hmm. But don't give up the practice. That's probably what they'll advise him.
But does that person's in his ulterior motives, even though he might spark the Emuna, does he not have the potential for Olam Haba until that Emuna sparks?
Not according to standard reading of the sources, however harsh that sounds. And I'm not getting involved now to something we may or may not explore. What about an Apikoros B'Shogeg? Meaning, he didn't believe, but he did an honest study. Not like most people. That you study how to invest in stocks. You study what kind of woman you want to marry. You study what kind of neighborhood you want to marry. But to study Emuna, to crack your head with sleepless nights and studying what has been written out there. No. So why is it you don't believe? Because I can't see God. Whatever. Because, forgive me for saying it's such a vexing problem. Because my or my neighbor's child died at a young age. And if God existed, why should things like that happen? But with all the pain that we could value someone with that kind of reaction, but that's sloppy. So you have a kasha, so you dump everything? Study. Why don't you read Rabbi Kaplan's volume on Tzadik Aral and Rosh Hashanah? So again, God will judge who's a shogeg, who's a mazid, and we get to later, we'll discuss the famous debate about what if you, what's called an apikoros b'shogeg, meaning what if you blow it and you carry Emuna b'shogeg? Do you still get Olam Haba? Well, let's assume that he does it willfully. Okay, so then I think the answer I gave, I think it's correct. Again, these are very weighty topics. I always try to excuse myself that, God didn't appoint me as representative. If you have kashas on this year, I'm not Moshe Rabbeinu from Har Sinai. I'm trying to present ideas, and you'll study more on your own, and happy to continue the discussion. But again, I'm just reading the sources as they present themselves. that a lack of proper belief leads to forfeiting Olam Haba. Yes?
We're saying that this is the source for the Emuna?
The Rambam seems to have attributed it and the Sefer Yikarim also in that way, but much has been written about this. It's not like the Chazal never said, and here are the Ikar Emuna. And they also said there are even actions or inactions that could lead to forfeiting. So you can't say that anything that you forfeit all haba for must be an Ikar Emuna, but it's very tempting to say this is Chazal telling us that there are central beliefs. And by indicating that you forfeit all haba without them indicates how central they are. But yes, this is a primary source for the concept of Ikar Emuna. But as we'll see, the exact details and the number, etc., whether these are just paradigms, has been debated in Jewish scholarship.
Yeah.
Certainly could serve as a source that there are fundamentals.
Yeah, I was just gonna. It's not as good as other diuk, but that's Raphael.
Wow.
The Ein Torah Min Hashemayim. It's not necessarily Kol Torah Kula, meaning it's the Ein Torah Min Hashemayim.
Okay. There are other Gemaras that implies the totality of Okay, let's move on. Let me just frame things a little bit, especially if we start a little late. I don't know, they have me slated for this monstrous, 100 minutes. Okay, so we're going to try to pause. Let's say by now we'll try to pause at 4:05. Then we're going to take a 10-minute break. And at 4:15 till 4:50 we'll give the second round. Okay? Okay, so next question. How many Ikar Emuna are there? And what is the definition of an Ikar Emuna? Okay, so we quoted the Mishnah Sanhedrin. So the answer should be 3. And especially if you define Apikoros as someone who denies God. So it's very neat. Okay, we have origin of everything, right? That's God. We have His message for us. That's Torah Min Hashemayim. And then we have Chiyat HaMetim. Now here we have to give the class I have to supposed to giving every year, but for now we're going to broaden the perspective of Chiyat HaMetim, not just as a certain sub-part of the Messianic era where righteous individuals will be resurrected, but we're going to refer to Chiyat HaMetim more in those who have studied the topic, in the Ramban, Nachmanides way, rather than the Maimonides way of Chiyat HaMetim being ultimate reward. Chiyat HaMetim being the portal to Olam Haba. So then we have something very, very fundamental and neat here. We have belief in God. We have belief in the blueprint blueprint, not the term I wanted to use, even though it is the blueprint, the Constitution and the contract that God was making with, originally was supposed to be humanity, then became the Jewish people. Humanity got downgraded to just Noahide laws. And then ultimate destiny. Olam Haba, which perhaps we could describe in more emotional and poetic terms of communion with God for all eternity. Or if you want to use a term that was made famous by Hasidus, but ultimately appears many times in the Torah, or still make a share on it, Dveikus B'Hashem. So we have God. Maybe someone can come up with a better term, not Constitution, but instruction manual. This doesn't do it for me, but guidebook. Okay, we'll say it that way. God, guidebook, and goal. Right? So those we could certainly resonate with us as a very fundamental, and indeed, as we shall see in a moment, that the Sefer Ikarim, maybe we'll see it right now, the Sefer Ikarim was written by a not as well-known scholar, unless you really delved into these kinds of topics. It happens to be, from what I've seen, that it seems to have been part of like classic Torah literature. It has somehow fallen out of popularity. But like the Maharsha, for example, Maharsha, a classic Talmudist, he's always quoting Sefer Ikarim. So it's now very much part of Jewish scholarship. The Sefer Ikarim was a very, very organized treatment of the fundamental principles. That's why it's called Sefer Ikarim. It was written by a late Rishon who lived in the 1400s. His name was Rabbi Yosef Albo. And again, in my humble opinion, of the medieval scholarship, I'm not a scholar, so I shouldn't really say that, but of the works that Rishonim wrote on Ikari Emuna, the Emuna Sudeis by Rosh and the Morah Nevuchim by the Rambam. Again, no one should have the misimpression that I have read through all of these, but a chunk here and there. But the Sefer Ikarim was my favorite, because even though it's not easy to get through, but it's the most organized, and I think the easiest to understand, and has very, very fundamental principles. Whatever, on Shabbos I was kidding around with the boys, just saying, people have lots of kashas. I said, what, you're the first one to think about this? You ever studied what the giants wrote about these things? So much of what I meant by that was, have you ever read Sefer Ikarim? Have you ever read how he dealt with the age-old questions that you think you're the first one to come up with? Okay, so in any case, highly recommended. Maybe someone can convince ArtScroll to print it, but you need to make it more popular. You need to not only translate it, you need to elucidate it. Okay. The Sefer Ikarim writes here toward the bottom of page 1. Again, my apologies, page 1 doesn't have a number, the rest of the pages have a number. Everyone have a sheets, I have extras, don't have to be shy, I'll put it over here in case anyone didn't get so. Please take. Okay. Haderech hanochon sheyiroh ali b'sfiras ikarim shehem shorashim v'yesodot Torah Elokit hu. It seems to me that the fundamentals of godly Torah, ki ha'ikarim ha'kolim v'achrekim adas Elokit hem shlosha. V'hem mitzias Hashem v'ashgocha l'tzchar la'onesh Torah min hashamayim. The existence of God, divine providence leading to reward and punishment, and Torah min hashamayim. And in a later section, he ties it into the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, right? So Jeremy will just mention this, like Mamash, he said, that's it, that's the headquarters. Notice how he expanded belief in Tchiyat HaMetim to Schar V'Onesh, and he expanded it a bit more to, well, Schar V'Onesh, meaning because God's monitoring what you're doing. So there's Hashgacha, meaning there's a relationship even while we're in this world. God is not just awaiting us in the next world, right? So he includes that within that as well. Now, most famously, if you ask anyone, Ikari Emuna, like, who wrote the book on that? Like, who wrote the book on Ikari Emuna? Not the Sefer Ikarim, even though he called it the Book of Fundamentals, but no, which scholar starting from Har Sinai till now is most famous for the principles of faith? The Rambam, Maimonides. And he wrote a list, of course, of 13. So again, perhaps some of you have studied it. I just happened to notice, Bli Neder, I hope to go through it at some point, from Moshe Shapiro, one of the greatest thinkers of our generation, wrote a whole elucidation on the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. Rabbi Kaplan wrote a thin volume on it. Rabbi Aaron Feldman from Ner Yisrael also wrote a sefer on that. But just going back to basics over here, where did the Rambam present his list of 13? Which I just noting doesn't appear anywhere in the Gemara, right? He developed that, not sitting on a desert island, but reading Gemara and philosophy and working it all out, he developed those 13, right? To codify it. So where did he write about it, yes?
Is it in the Pirush on the Mishnah?
Okay, excellent. And thank you for not falling into the trap. I was expecting you to say in his Siddur. Because in the Siddur it has a list of 13 animamins. So the way it developed, of course, is the Rambam, when he was a younger man, wrote Pirush HaMishnah. You don't have to feel guilty reading the Pirush HaMishnah in English, because he wrote it in Arabic, so you're not reading it in the original anyway when you're reading it in Hebrew. You should feel guilty reading the Rambam's Mishnah Torah in English, because that he did write in Hebrew. It was, I think, his only work that he wrote in Hebrew. Okay, I'll leave it to the scholars to figure out what kind of Arabic he wrote in. It was Judeo-Arabic. It was more like a Yiddish. It was a combination of Arabic and Hebrew, and he wrote it in Hebraic characters, just like Yiddish and German. Okay. And if you can get the original, for those who know Arabic and you want to read it in the original, good. So you can get the original, it's very, very accessible. So the Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnah, not surprisingly, in the introduction to Perek Yud of Sanhedrin, so it's very curious. He says, I want to tell you about this Mishnah and a lot of concepts that are discussed that are related to it. I want to tell you what Chesed Mesim is. I want to tell you what an Apikoros is. I want to explain to you what exactly we mean by Torah Min HaShamayim. I want to tell you what Gehinnom is, what Mashiach is. And he says, now I want to talk about fundamentals of faith. He never dots the I and crosses the T. And why am I doing that here? Because the Mishnah seems to give us a list. It always bothered me, but it seems to me that's why he chose to write it there. But the Mishnah gives a list of 3. He's going to give a list of 13. So, little unclear. Again, not such a scholar to be able to answer that, but he was writing an introduction to that Mishnah, but he never quite links it. He just said, I'm going to choose this as a forum to discuss it. Those who'd like me to show it to you inside, I'm happy to have it available on the shelf. Also an English translation of it. So that's where he explicates, one after the other. HaYesod HaRishon, HaYesod HaSheni, HaYesod HaShlishi. Sometimes he sources it from Sukkim, sometimes from Gemaros. He didn't get a chance to brush on it now. Sometimes I don't think he gives any sources. Doesn't mean he didn't have, but because he was writing it briefly. He didn't elaborate on all of his sources. In the history of Judaism, so with some debate, but that list caught on like wildfire, and people grabbed onto it. There were even those who suggested that maybe the Shloshes Midos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, Keil, Rachum, V'Chanun, are directly parallel to the Yud Gimel Ikari Emuna of the Rambam, even though, again, there's no Gemara that lists 13. It was the Rambam's list. And since it became so popular, and people wanted people to know about them, and not everyone was so scholarly to be able to read the commentary of the Mishnah, so some scholar of, I think, unknown authorship wrote the list of the Animams, which was a summary of what the Rambam wrote in the 13 paragraphs introducing the paragraph. If you want to be a scholar, so you gotta carefully compare what it says in the Animamin list to what it says in the introduction to the Mishnah. Not exactly the same, but basically the same. There have been books making comparisons. The Animamin was a reworking of the Rambam's Zikar. Who knows where else it got into Jewish liturgy? The Rambam's Zikar Emuna? Yigdal. Yigdal was written by somewhat of a controversial figure. He was an Orthodox Jew, but certain things he did, whatever, that were controversial. So he wrote a famous poem, Yigdal. And that's even more controversial because some claim that he took liberty to modify a little bit. Again, he didn't change our religion, gentlemen, to be clear. But if you want to look into that too, so you could find certain minor differences between the formulation of the Rambam and the formulation of the Yigdal. Okay. What was the Rambam trying to accomplish by writing 13? The Rambam lived in the 12th century. He just crossed over into the 13th. I think he died in 1204 or something. The Ramban was a young man when the Rambam passed away, or maybe a young boy. They overlapped in lives, but didn't see each other. The Sefer Karim source seems very straightforward. He got it from the Mishnah. Where did the Rambam come up with the 13? So first let's understand, and the Sefer Karim himself, Rav Yosef Albo, points this out. Recall, Rambam lived in the 1100s. The Sefer Karim lived in the 1400s. So I can't ask, why didn't the Rambam follow Sefer Karim in terms of why didn't he speak to him? They didn't speak to him. But why didn't he follow his model? That seems the more intuitive model. You have 3 fundamentals. God, plan, that's Torah Min HaShamayim, and relationship, communion, after everything's done. So it's a mystery. The Rambam never said what he's trying to accomplish by writing Dafka 13 and how he came up with that number. But let us please discern that the Rambam's 13 divide into 5, 4, and 4. Take a look at a Siddur for short. You'll see the first 5 are about God. The next 4 are about Torah. But of course the premise of Torah. What is Torah? Right? Instructions for life. Okay, I'm not talking about the cosmic idea of Torah. And how do we know what the plan is? Gotta believe. But it's like, I woke up in a dream and I know the plan. I feel like tzitzis today. Maybe I wear a little blue. I don't know if the blue. Maybe not. How do we know about Torah?
The rabbis.
Oh, nice. How did God inform us about Torah? Revealed it. Okay, you got me scared there. Okay. Right? Revelation of Sinai. Right? We're not going to have time, we're not giving an Aisha Torah Discovery Seminar now, but we weren't at our Sinai. Okay? I don't know if that's was part of Rabbi Schoonmaker's idea of being Mechazik Emuna, but maybe we'll have a chance to discuss it a little bit. But we plug into the revelation of Sinai. In other words, God revealed it to a nation, not just to an individual. Okay? Much needs to be said about that. What does that presume? In terms of what Kiddush does that presume? That God talks to man. Aristotle didn't believe in that. Right? Other philosophers didn't believe in that. God is God. He's in heaven. What do they have to do with lowly man? So what is that called? God talking to man? Let's give the baby a name. Prophecy. Okay. So the Rambam's after the first 5 is, I believe in the prophets, which of course presumes is a concept of prophecy. I believe in Moshe Rabbeinu as the highest level prophet. And then I believe in Torah Min HaShamayim, and what we're practicing is the Torah Min HaShamayim. And I believe, against Christianity and Islam, that God doesn't change his mind and give a new Torah. So that's an expansion of Torah Min HaShamayim. And the last 4 about divine knowledge, providence, Mimos HaMashiach, Tfias HaMesim, which is all elaborations on providence and end goal. So although Sefer Korah, list of 3, Rambam, list of 13, that's, you bought stocks that way, that'd be great, 400, more than 400% more. But fundamentally, they're basically saying the same thing. Except the Sefer Korah whittled them down to 3, and he even calls the Rambam's 544 branches of the root. So at first glance, it sounds like just playing number games over here, right? And but they're all agreeing. We're going to see in a moment that, again, they're not disagreeing fundamentally, but there's a more powerful disagreement than just numbers. Yes?
I'm trying to understand, what is this last category?
The last category? Providence and the end reward / punishment. In a word, you can call it relationship. God exists, gave us a manual as to how to elevate ourselves, cares about us, and gives us eternal reward, which can be defined as eternal relationship with him. Okay. One final idea, and then we'll take a break. So, 300 years after the Rambam, there was debate as to whether the Rambam's list should be accepted as the normative list. Based on what we presented now, they're not fundamentally arguing, but more structurally. What should be considered the list? There is somewhat of a famous debate between them, not in terms of truth, but in terms of if it's an Iker Emuna. The Sefer Korah is of the opinion that a Jew who denies the coming of the Mashiach, I'll say it my way, he doesn't say it this way, is a fool, because he's arriving at falsehood, and he should research further. But we're not going to brand him in the same way the Mishnayos brand someone who denies God in Torah Mishamayim and Tfias HaMesim. In other words, he's not denying a fundamental, but he's denying the truth. So that's perhaps the only actual nafkamina between them. And finally, looking at the bottom from the Chassam Sofer, a more recent scholar, the 1800s, the Moshe Sofer, so he writes, the student of his, Inyan HaVikuach, and yesh Yud Gimel Ikarim, or Gimel, Yud Gimel Ikarim, of course, Rambam, Gimel, Kehari Albo, or Yosef Albo, Lo Yadati Shum Nafkusa. Right, so that's what he writes. I don't know any nafkamina. Like, they're all basically saying the same, just a matter of numbers. Kiyim Kriya Shem Bilvad. Just a matter of what you put in your list. And then he writes a third opinion, which we didn't explore yet. Uladash HaMekubalim, Ein Kam Iker. There are no fundamentals. If we stop here, it's a cash in the yarmulke, right? We don't have a religion. No. Ein kan iker. Ki kol kotzim shel Torah hem ikorim. Ma bein zeh lo zeh. Every single Torah truth is a fundamental. So, what do you give me a list of 3 and 13? There are a million Ikari Emuna. Be'ereshes, Iker Emuna, Bet, Reish, Aleph, Shin, Yutov. It's all true. The white of tzitzis, Iker Emuna. The blue of tzitzis, all 39 malachos. We're not going to go through all 39 now. Every Torah truth, Torah mandated belief, Torah mandated thought, Torah mandated speech, Torah mandated action. They're all fundamental. Equally fundamental. What are you doing making a list? What are you doing whittling things down? They're all fundamentally true. And indeed, as the Chassam Sofer himself writes, it's hard to understand why anyone would hold otherwise, because take a look at this. I deny Mashiach. So what am I denying? Says the Chassam Sofer, I'm denying Tanakh. Because it talks about Mashiach. And we're supposed to believe in Torah and Hashemayim, revelation. So you can be selective about what parts of Tanakh and Torah you believe in. Just read out Bilam's prophecy. Talks about Geula. Asherena v'lo karov. Right? Take a look at that again, be a little chizuk of what's going on now, whatever. Right? There's going to be redemption. Not necessarily going to be so pretty, at least for the Umot Olam. Right? So, Sim miyat kitim. Okay, I'll take a look at that pasuk over there. The inu ashur, the inu ever. You look in the biblical dictionaries who these people are. Okay, whatever. You're denying Tanakh. So that's more like the Mekubalim, because everything revealed in Torah is true. That's including Torah and Shemayim. So why are you like splitting Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? Well, that says that God exists and it says that He's one. So why do you need an Iker Emuna that God exists and He's one? Just Torah and Shemayim, that includes it. Okay, but so you need to analyze this a lot, and again I apologize that I can't do a better job of explicating and understanding the different views, but we have 3 views. 13, 3, a million zillion. So let me just end now and then we'll take the break with a very, very potent teaching from Rabbi Bleich in that Sefer, and unfortunately I did not get a chance to be mechaded or to sharpen it, and really I wish I had before, but I just couldn't find the book. In order to understand why the Rambam's writing 3 and why the Sefer Yikarim writing 13, and why the Mekubalim have a million zillion, we have to understand, and this is like a very powerful technique in learning, because they're not talking the same language. Because each one is defining the word Iker in a different way. It's not that they're fundamentally arguing on what the Jew is supposed to believe. But they're trying to, again, as scholars do, what is the definition? What's Ochel Nefesh? What's Machshirei Ochel Nefesh? What's Muktzah? We're trying to give a very rigorous definition, and based on definition, you'll see if there are 3, 13, or as many Torah truths as exist. For Sefer Yikarim, and perhaps this is the simplest, and he says so, really. An Iker is a Yesod. What's a Yesod? Gentlemen, who knows the exact translation of Yesod?
Foundation.
A foundation. So to use a building analogy, what happens when you remove, let's say, the 16th floor of a 17 floor building? So the 17th floor will collapse too, and certainly the 16th floor. But what about the other 15 floors? They will remain, because it's not the foundation. What happens if Lo Aleinu, and unfortunately we heard about this recently, what happens if a little crack, or certainly a big crack, occurs in the foundation of a building with an earthquake or through some defect of the building? The whole thing collapses. When Sahel wants to bring down a building, in Lebanon or whatever, so they go for not the top, they go for the foundation. Everything collapses. So Rabbi Bleich explains, again, if you read the Sefer Yikarim carefully, he says this. The definition of an Iker is when you remove it, you have no religion. If you remove tzitzis, So you're living a lie. It's fundamental. But if you deny God, there's no religion. If you deny Torah and Shemayim, there's no religion. Don't delude yourself into thinking, there is a religion, orthopraxy. No. If you deny God, if you deny Torah and Shemayim, if you deny end goal of eternity with God, that's not the religion. Now, if you're a real scholar, you read the Sefer Khan carefully, he actually is pointing it out fundamentally. He spends a lot of time proving that there's only one true religion. But theoretically, if there would have been multiple religions, this is going to be true for all the religions. Because every religion has to have a God, a revealed Torah, and an end game. Otherwise, it's not a religion. Again, he spends a lot of time that we don't have a multiverse over here where you choose, and he shows how we should have a confidence that the only true religion is Judaism. But he starts very fundamentally by pointing out that this is the foundation of what he calls every dat elokit. Dat not with an ayin, but the tough like that. Rambam, again, according to some scholars, means the following. The Rambam, and some accused him of being too Aristotelian in this regard, held that ultimately God is the ultimate intellect. And we are all endowed a little bit of that divine intellect in our minds, and our goal is to perfect our intellect. Again, exactly how mitzvahs fit into the Rambam scheme is an important philosophical idea, but certainly the Rambam held you have to keep mitzvahs too. You can't just think like this all day long. That's not going to get you to Olam Haba. Right? But he certainly highlighted the idea of developing the intellect. What he called, and again, forgive me, I'm sure many of you have studied the philosophy more than I have, God is called the separate intelligence. Right? We are the created intelligences, and our goal is to cleave to the separate intelligence by perfecting ours. So Rabbi Bleich pointed out that this was an interesting shot that was given by Reb Chaim Brisker and one of the secular Jewish philosophers in the 1800s. They both said the same thing. And what did they come up with? You need a minimal perfection of the intellect in order to get to Olam Haba. Not as a punishment that if you didn't get to that you don't get Olam Haba, but that experience is meaningless because your mind is not sufficiently developed to cleave to the ultimate mind. So the Rambam wrote you a crib sheet. I know that if you're very wise, you'll think, God exists. So then you'll read 3 chapters in the Moreh Nevuchim and you'll figure out, it must be God is one. And then you're going to think another 5 weeks and you're going to figure out, must be that God has no body, right? Those who know the Moreh Nevuchim, you spend a lot of time developing this. They're all corollaries from the existence of God. And then you're going to Torah and Shemayim. And then Torah and Shemayim. It must be prophecy. Must be Moshe Rabbeinu was like the highest level prophet. Because if it wouldn't be, maybe God would change his mind and give it to another prophet. And then Torah could be mutable. And so on and so forth. So the Rambam was doing the whole Jewish people a favor by giving you the crib sheet of the minimum you have to develop in your mind for Olam Haba to be meaningful and therefore to be able to exist in such an arena. That's why he wrote more than 3. That's why he wrote the corollaries. Because it's important to know them in order to develop the seichel. And what are the Mekubalim trying to give over? What are Jews supposed to believe? The whole Torah is true. Everything that we're given over and we are taught, both the Torah Shel Ksav and Torah Shel Peh, they're not trying to describe when the building falls down and you take it away. They're not trying to describe the minimum knowledge you have to have in order to earn Olam Haba. They're trying to describe Torah truth. All the Torah truths are true. It's not this is 100% true and this is 90% true. They're coming from different perspectives as to how they're defining Ikar Amun. Okay, so with that we'll break. Okay. Okay, so we discussed, we tried the definition of belief, of how great reward there is for belief. We discussed the origin of the belief system in the Mishnah Sanhedrin and the fact that one doesn't believe forfeits Olam Haba. We discussed a significant debate in Rishonim as to what the numbers should be, and we discussed, although there can be other approaches, an approach that was given by Rabbi Bleich in his work with perfect faith, as to perhaps the Sefer, the Rambam, Sefer Ikarim, and the Mekubalim are not as arguing as you think. They're just defining the word Ikar in a different way, and therefore leads to a different conclusion as to what the number is. Okay, I wanted to discuss another topic, which is page 2, and that section 4 is Emuna Mitzvah. A mitzvah, of course, is defined as a commandment, and of course, at first glance, of course, Emuna is a mitzvah, because a mitzvah is a commandment, meaning something that you have to do. So we try to develop at length that we are a religion, not only a deed, but also a creed. So if you don't believe in the system, not only is there going to be a punishment, but there's also going to be a forfeiting of all habas. How could you not call it a mitzvah? Indeed, there seems to be, at least concerning at least one of the fundamental principles, namely the existence of God, as well as number 2, that there are no other gods besides him, that he is one, seems to be the explicit implication of the Gemara in Makos, the very last daf or so. Darash Rabbi Simloi, in the top of page 2, Sheish Meos U'Shloshes Mitzvos Namelo Moshe, there were 630 mitzvos given. If I'm not mistaken, it's the only time in Shas that it mentions the number 613. It's mentioned by Midrashim very often. I think this is the only time it's mentioned, which doesn't. As the Rambam writes, saying it once is enough. You don't have to repeat yourself again and again. It doesn't suddenly become true just because you repeat yourself. That's what the average believes. That's what the New York Times says. But so truth is truth, even if you say it once. Falsehood is falsehood, even if you say it 1,000,000 times. So, but it's a curiosity that I think the Gemara only mentions Targum mitzvahs once. Okay, so what does it say? Shlosh me'es v'shishim v'chamesh lavin, k'minyan mosachama, 365 negative, like the days or so a year, Messiah v'aram shmona say, k'neged varov, 248, parallel to the limbs of a person. Okay, to work it out with anatomy, as to how to count to 248. It's not the same definition as the biological definition of a limb. Okay. Amar Rav Emuna, Mikro, Torah Tziva Lana Moshe. Okay, Torah is Gematria, Shis Me'eh V'chatzrei. Torah, you'll work it out, 611. But there's 613 mitzvahs. So that's what the Gemara explains. Anochi lo yilacha v'yad v'urashman. The first 2 dibros were heard directly from God. The other mitzvahs were heard from Moshe Rabbeinu. In addition to hearing that from Moshe Rabbeinu, we also heard directly that God was choosing Moshe as the prophet. That's what the Rambam elaborates at length, because God wanted to have us to have an utter confidence that Moshe was giving over truth. Even when the Jews got scared, they no longer wanted to hear the voice of God directly, so they only heard 2 dibros from God. And these are, of course, the first of the Aseres HaDibros. So what's the first of the Aseres HaDibros, gentlemen? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. So that sounds like belief in God. Taking it for granted that that's a fact. So let's do the math over here. Torah Tziva Lana Moshe. Moshe commanded us Torah. Torah Gematria 611. So why Torah Tziva Lana Moshe? Because Moshe gave to us 611. The 2 of them we didn't need Moshe, because we heard it directly from God. And what were those 2 mitzvahs that we heard directly from God? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. So write that mitzvah, please, in your Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Sounds like you're going to write to believe that God exists. Lo Yilacha. There shouldn't be any other gods besides you. Rashi says it means you shouldn't make other Geshulah. You shouldn't make a Vodazara. But Lefi Pshuto, the Ramban and others say it means you shouldn't have any others. So what does it mean to have any others? It means you believe in multiple gods. So that's the Ikar Emuna of that Hashem is not Echad. The Ikar Emuna that He's only Echad, right? Meaning the negation. So the first mitzvah seems to be to Ikar Emuna. There are no Gemaras that say that there's a mitzvah to believe in Mashiach and there's a mitzvah to believe in Chiyas HaMesim. It just says that if you don't, you forfeit the Olam Haba. But this Gemara, if we could follow the pattern, sounds like that Ikar Emuna should be mitzvahs. The problem is that even the Rambam, who counts belief in God as a mitzvah and not just an Ikar Emuna, and he counts the belief in divine oneness not just as a mitzvah, Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, in the negative, but counts it as a mitzvah as well as an Ikar Emuna. But he doesn't count any of the others as a mitzvah. He doesn't count the commandment to believe that the Moshe Rabbeinu is the highest prophet. There's no mitzvah to believe that prophecy exists. There's no mitzvah to believe that Torah is min hashamayim. So, we're only giving one shiur. This should be a whole year's course, if not a whole lifetime study, which it certainly should be. So, if you go off the derech because of the shiur, it's your fault. I keep telling you, idach zil gemor, this is just a smattering. I'm trying to whet the appetite to increase the excitement to study these kinds of things. And Baruch Hashem, we live in an era where it's much easier than ever before to do that. So here we have to understand what a mitzvah means. And a trivial definition, which is wrong, is a mitzvah means a divine expectation. I'm not saying that isn't an important concept. But when we speak about the 613 mitzvahs, it is incorrect to say that the definition of the 613 mitzvahs is 613 divine expectations. Allow me to give a mashal, which we're going to use in a moment, to help explain why some Rishonim, surprise, surprise, don't even count belief in God as a mitzvah. So I'm going to try not to speak disparagingly, but this I can't help it, because I don't care if you have a PhD, but if you write total nonsense, it's still total nonsense. So there is a book written by a scholar, and whatever, privately I could mention the book, but I'm not going to mention what it is, that, of course belief is not so important. Because if it was so important, you would go around all day like the Christians and say, I believe, I believe, I believe. There's no chiyuv to say ani mamin every day. There's no chiyuv to say it at a bris milah. There's no chiyuv to say it at a bar mitzvah. There's no chiyuv to say it at a wedding. So you see, belief is not so important. That's just silly. It's so fundamental that we don't have to go around saying it all the time. The whole premise of a bris and a bar mitzvah and a wedding, at least a Jewish wedding, is a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I threw out a challenge to and he says, and it's not mentioned in the Siddur either, because ani mamin is not a requirement to say. That's worse than the others. I threw out a challenge to my students, start from the Birchas Kriyat Shema, and go dip in a little bit into Shemona Esrei, and give me the 13 principles of faith. Some of them with a little bit between the lines, but you'll find 10 out of 13 smoothly. Starting with Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which we do say every day. Right? Emes v'yatziv v'nochon hadovar. What dovar? Everything we said in the Shema, which includes Kol Mitzvosai, Revelation, Prophecy, Baruch Atah Hashem, Gal Yisrael. Okay, enough of that editorial. Emuna is important, but it's not a mitzvah, so it can't be too important. We have to define what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is not 613 divine expectations. It's a formal list of what's counted in the 613. A little reciprocal, a little circular. Ask Rabbi Wolf what a mitzvah is. Tell him I sent you. He's going to smile, because he, among his many other pursuits, maybe I'm not at liberty to say, but he's doing a lot of study in the Rambam Sefer Mitzvahs. The ABCs of the Rambam Sefer Mitzvahs, just like with Emuna, what are the rules and regulations of what is included in the 613? So, tzitzis, is that 2 or 1? Oh, white and blue. Right? Tefillin, 2 or 1? Kriyat Shema, is that 3 or 1? 3 parshias. Okay, whatever, the Rambam might hold, that all 3 are min Torah, so it's even better. Count as 3, count as 1. Shabbos, at 39? Because there are 39 malachos? Or is that 1, do not do work? There are many rules and regulations. Hanukkah, is that a divine expectation? To light Hanukkah candles? Will there be a heavenly X and accountability for not lighting Hanukkah candles? So give me a reason why not. What's that? It's not in the Torah? Yes, but yet the Gemara in Shabbos and Megillah tells us that there is a biblical commandment to listen to the rabbinic legislation. And that's why we say Asher Kedishama V'Sosav Tzivonu L'Hadik Ner Shel Chanukah. So it's an indirect mitzvah min HaTorah, but it does have elements of obeying the divine decree. So do you count Chanukah as part of the Taryag mitzvahs? So the Rambam says, no, because Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, that's referring to the Mosaic revelation from God, which clearly didn't include Hanukkah. So technically, you can't count Hanukkah on the list. Is it a divine expectation? Certainly. Will there be accountability if you don't do it? Certainly. So there are rules about what's counted as a mitzvah, which are not necessarily identical with what God not only expects of us, like in an ideal lechatchila mitzvah in a 100 way, but with accountability if you don't. Maybe you'll appreciate this one. The Midrashim speak about how horrible Sodom was. You see it from the Psukim. They're surrounding the house of Lot. Give us your guest, right? The Neda also, right? Biblical term of Neda. What do you want from the guest? What? So obviously they were horrible people. Yechezkel describes the main crime of Sodom as the fact that they didn't give tzedakah. Ask the Ran on Sanhedrin. Didn't give tzedakah? It's not one of the Noahide commandments. If you don't know them yet, you should remember. It's a mnemonic. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, and the big three. Okay, the Noahide laws that all of humanity are expected to keep. One of them is not tzedakah. Says the Ran, what, you don't have a brain? You don't realize the whole world is premised on chesed? You don't realize that God Almighty gives you the sun every day and your lungs every day and causes you to breathe? You know what? They once had it when Chappelle celebrated his 36th birthday. So I think that was the slogan for the campaign. That pass it on, right? You get from God, give to others. What's the Ram telling us here? It's a divine expectation with disastrous consequences if you don't follow it, even if it's not a mitzvah. Many would say that's the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. Not for now. Okay? The Rambam didn't count it as part of the 613. But many say it's a divine expectation. Many want to say it's like, you don't have to have a mitzvah in the marriage manual to celebrate your anniversary. It's not a mitzvah d'oraisa, not the Rabbanan, and certainly not one of the chiyuvim ben ish le'ishto. But if you don't, find out. Okay, it's an expectation of the marriage. Practically, it's a chiyuv. Because without it, it's punishment. Without it, it's consequence. So that's a fascinating itself study. You could write a big paper on this. The things that are so fundamental, why were they not included in the mitzvahs? But for now, we just want to give like the technicalities. So again, watching the clock, the Sefer HaMitzvos, number 3, the Rambam Mitzvah say Aleph, and he says the same thing in Halacha Vav of the opening paragraph of Mishnah Torah. Ha-mitzvah rishona yatzivui asher tzivonu laha'amin ha'elokus. To believe in God. In the Mishnah Torah, he formulated it not as laha'amin, but as leida. And if you're a real scholar, it could be that the original Arabic that he wrote the Sefer HaMitzvos in, Mishnah Torah was written in Hebrew, was a word that's somewhat vague and actually maybe should be translated as to know rather than to believe. Okay, that we're not going to have so much time to explore what the difference between those two are, but it's an important topic in and of itself. Ramban, source 4. The Ramban, among many other Sforim, read the Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvos with a fine-tooth comb, and let him have it whenever he felt that he skipped a mitzvah, whenever he felt a mitzvah that he counted he shouldn't have counted, whenever a mitzvah he counted as 2 he should have counted as 1, whenever what he counted as 1 he should have counted as 2. All kinds of different hasagot or critiques of Ramban, Nachmanides on Rambam. So here the Rambam writes, he paraphrases a biblical verse, Amar Kosei, Emuna Zos, to believe in God, B'dibra Zeh, Lo Niflesi, V'lo Rechokehi. Right, this is not rocket science over here, that it's such a fundamental mitzvah to believe in God. And then the Ramban himself's right, but what should we do? The Bahag, the Baal Halachos Gedolos, someone who came about 100 and 150 years before the Rambam, maybe even earlier. The Rambam very famously, that's his like nemesis, so to speak. In the Sefer HaMitzvos, he's always arguing on the Bahag. The Bahag counted the Hallel. Why did you count Hallel? It's the Rabban. Well, I say Hallel too, but it's not in the Tariyah because Hallel's the Rabban. Rabban always tries to defend the Bahag. So the Rabban writes, and again I urge you if you can to read it inside at your own leisure. The Ramban defends the Bahag by saying that of course the Bahag knew that it's a fundamental belief in God. Without that, everything collapses. There's nothing. but it's not a mitzvah, because let's give the dictionary definition of mitzvah, just like we gave the dictionary definition of to believe. Mitzvah in the word tzivui? Commandment. Commandment presumes commander. To have a commandment, you need a commander. So, you can't include as a mitzvah belief in the commander, because that's circular. It doesn't mean you don't have to believe in the commander, but due to a technicality of what the word mitzvah means, which is commandment, that already presumes belief in the commander. Otherwise you can't have mitzvah. Now, Ramban quotes an analogy from the Mechilta, which we're not going to get involved in now. You can't have a king legislate unless you subscribe to the king's power to legislate. Otherwise, legislation's meaningless. Once again, did the Bahag hold, since he didn't count it as a mitzvah, that belief in God is optional? I'm not going to say I think not. I think to say any other way puts to the lie the whole writings of the whole Bahag, which is all about recording the Torah Sheval Peh. What Torah Sheval Peh? What, for kicks? Because we're talking about revelation by God Almighty, whose premise is that you're supposed to follow His will. In the Bahag's world, if you get to Olam Haba and you were orthoprax, by just following the commandments, but you didn't believe in God or in the meaning of all these things, are you going to be in serious trouble? Certainly. It's a divine expectation, but it's not a mitzvah, because it's a technicality. Taryag mitzvos nemru l'Moshe v'Sinai already presumes belief in God. How do you get there is a separate question. How do you arrive at belief in God? Which I think there were separate classes on. Practically strengthening our Emuna. Right? But this is a more theoretical kind of class with secondarily trying to give chizuk on the centrality and the nature of it. Give a mashal of going to Harvard University, but okay. I went to Yeshiva University. Good. So we're going to Yeshiva University. We'll focus on the university part, and I have to take a class on calculus. But before they give me the class in calculus, first they give me a pre-test to make sure that I learn basic algebra. And I flunk out of the algebra pre-test. So they're not going to let me into the class. So I stormed Dr. Berman's office, Rabbi Dr. Berman, Nacharusa, and I say, they didn't let me into the class of calculus. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I took the test and I flunked. I said, okay, so, brush up on the algebra. I said, but I looked in the course catalog, and this is a class on calculus. It's not a class on algebra. So it doesn't say anywhere in the guidebook that I have to take algebra first. So he's going to smile at me, or maybe slap me across my face, so didn't learn anything in Grus, and say, you never heard of a prerequisite? So now I ask you, is it chiyuv to take algebra, or is it only an expectation? Well, practically speaking, it's a chiyuv to take algebra in order to get. So if it's a chiyuv to take the calculus class, let's say it's a requirement, that means it's a chiyuv to do the prerequisites. But it's not going to be called a course in YU. So again, whether you like that analogy or not, it's fine. If you don't, please come to Adarabah, please teach me better analogies. I like to give Mishalim. He said, so that's the Bahag's view of Emuna. God tells you put on tzitzis, but wait. But the premise of putting on tzitzis is belief in God, belief in revelation, belief in the binding nature of mitzvos, belief in the meaning of tzitzis. So you're going to strip all that away, and then you're going to have the mitzvah of tzitzis? You're not going to have the mitzvah of tzitzis. So the Rambam and the Bahag are both agreeing that Emuna is a practical commandment, but theoretically might not be included in the list. Is there a nafkamina between the Bahag and the Rambam? So the Abarbanel, in a work called Rosh Amanah, has a beautiful insight which we cannot elaborate on. If you want to do your homework, read the first 6 set of halachas of the Rambam in Hilchos Yisod Torah. If you want to read it in English, so go to Chabad.org. They have a Hebrew-English Rambam. You also have over here in the Beis Medrash the Wagshel edition. Rabbi Tager, I think the name is. Very nice translation. The Rambam writes, the foundation of everything. He didn't say mitzvah. The foundation of everything is to believe in God. This God is one. This God is everything. If you could imagine a world in which there wouldn't be God, there wouldn't be a world. If you could imagine where there's no world, there would still be God. And then he writes, These concepts are a mitzvah to know, as it says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Says the Abarbanel, why did he say that at Halacha 6? Why did he say it at Halacha 1? So he explains, because the mitzvah to know God is not just check, I believe in God. The mitzvah is to know everything the Rambam wrote about God. Namely, God's not just a 3-letter word. He's not just the creator of the world. God means, the way they put it in Aristotelian terms, right? The non-dependent existence. In other words, my own humble made-up word, he's not creator, he is existor. And that's indeed his name. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Ho-Yehovah V'Yeh, which means not just that he's timeless, but he is existence. Which is exactly the way he identifies himself. Right? The Pasuk tells us, right, I'll say it in the real Pasuk, even though it's one of the shames of Hashem, but for the purpose of learning, you're allowed to say, Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, which is the Aleph. I am who I am. Literally it means I will be who I will be. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is he is. Aleph, right, followed by the Hey, followed by Yud, followed by Hey is I am. I am existing. Shalom Aleichem, my name is existence. Which means what? Such a fundamental. This hand over here, this nudnikan that just acting like a clown, these papers, this world, this Aron Kodesh, the sun, even the bad Rishonim in Iran, right? Together with Bibi, together with the Mediterranean Sea, together with that computer, to some extent it's all a mirage. Because if God didn't constantly will it into existence, it would zap into non-existence. When you read theoretical physics, this is very cool. Okay? That's not my field, but the fact that the rules of nature don't just, there are. Right? There has to be force generating it, otherwise it slides back into chaos, right? First law of thermodynamics. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going on uncharted territory, right? The fundamental rule is randomness. Unless there's a force keeping it generated into existence. This is what we say in the davening, Mechadesh V'tuva B'chol Yom Tamid Masi Bereshis. He renews the creation. That is not necessarily the Ikar Emuna. That's a mitzvah. That's more than the basics. So it could be that the Rambam agrees to the Bahag. That basic belief in God is a prerequisite, and therefore there can't be a command without a commander. But he's including the mitzvah more than just the basics. And that's a mitzvah, not just nikra. And that could be why some of the other Ikar Emuna are not counted as a mitzvah, because those are fundamental principles that guide and inform our religious life, and are not necessarily formal commandments. Okay, much needs to be said about this, and we're already a little bit in overtime. I just wanted to mention a few more points, and that is as follows. How do you arrive at Emuna? So maybe the Southern Baptist minister would tell you, you gotta believe. And if you don't believe, then you have purgatory waiting for you. Now we hope they're wrong, because their version of belief is wrong. So how do we arrive at belief? So again, I'm thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, I didn't give this analogy, but I think it's so important. At home we had an Encyclopedia Judaica. You probably have heard of it. I was trying to sell it before I made Aliyah, but now it's all online. No one wants to buy it. Okay. So there's a dictionary, there's an encyclopedic entry called God. Okay? You would expect, you would hope, in the Encyclopedia Judaica, it's about 50 pages long, maybe 60 pages. To be sure, about font size 8. So it probably has about 10,000 words. But relative to the rest of the encyclopedia, it's only like 50 pages. And they have also a lot about, proofs of God, the theological proof, the ontological proof, and the cosmological proof, and all the logicals. And I was just thinking to myself, to some extent, how, I don't know what word to use, how absurd. The source of all knowledge is being contained within 60 pages of an encyclopedia. Now, to be sure, I'm not knocking the encyclopedia. It was a very meaningful article. But just reflecting on that, the concept of God is so fundamental. It's everything. How could you whittle him down into 60 pages? So that said, how do we arrive at belief in God? So, Emuna Judeos, Rasadigon, one of the earliest collections of organized Jewish philosophy. He writes, and this is also discussed, of course, in secular sources as well, I believe this study is called epistemology. Again, I'm sure the Navina and Madha know much more about this. What is epistemology? The study of knowledge. So this is something that all philosophers dealt with. How do we arrive at knowledge? Especially you're trying to get to belief. The belief means to know to be true. So I could be studying a course in comparative religions. You'll ask Yishai whether she's taking that course. And I could know that Islam has these dictates. I'm not knocking anybody. You should go ask your local Orthodox rabbi, whoever that is. Take me to your leader, right? You might know that Christians, at least the Trinitarians, believe in whatever, the Spirit and the Ghost, etc., etc. But you don't believe it. If the goal is to get to belief, you have to first start with how do you get to knowledge. Says Rasadigon, and many other philosophers say the same thing. Senses, logic. He actually says something else which maybe other philosophers agree with. Axiological principles that are intuitive, that you can't prove, but you just know to be true, like the concept that love exists, even though you can't write a formula about it. And he says, Ad Kan Aristotle. We believe in Masorah. At first glance, Masorah means tradition. Okay, so basically, you gotta believe, otherwise I'll smack you. Right? Otherwise the Rebbe will hit you. No! Masorah means relying on others who have gone through 1, 2, or 3. Because you trust them. And you have a confidence that what they're saying is true, even though you didn't independently discover it. Those who know what's going on in academia about evolution, and I'm not taking sides in that great debate, whether evolution is a true theory, false theory, is it against the Torah, is it with the Torah, not our topic, I'm sure you study this more than I. But there's a lot of dogma about evolution in university, in the sense that no one's redoing the experiments, but they're taking it for granted. And granted that, so now we move on to this. What are they doing? They're doing Masorah. So there are ways of arriving at belief through, broadly speaking, we'll call 1, 2, and 3, self-discovery, and there are ways of arriving at belief and knowledge and or belief through taking someone else's word for it. That's not a crime. That's very much part of human existence. Because we can't all be Avraham Avinu. We can't all be great philosophers. So, when you look at the sources, there are those who say, Emuna Pshuta is where it's at. Simple belief. What simple belief? Sprinza. Right? Because that's what mommy and daddy taught her. And there's no, in any kind of sense, rediscovery. For many, that's all they have the ability to do. And many advocate that in a minimal level, even if you're going to say that that's where we're at, but it has to plug in to the concept that I'm relying on reliable people. Because if you're not doing that, so go be a Christian, or go be an atheist. Happen to luck out that you were born into the right religion. So at least plugging into the fact that my papa told me this, and his papa told him that, and his papa told him, and what about great-great-great-grandpapa? All the million went out of Egypt and had witnessed miracles. In other words, the root was, number 1, senses. All of them were at Har Sinai. But I wasn't at Har Sinai. But we're relying on something reliable. Again, you work out the details of why we consider it to be reliable. We're talking about the idea of national revelation. That's all included in Emuna Pshuta. In my humble opinion. Others might disagree. But if they disagree, I have trouble with that. Because why don't you say Emuna Pshuta in Christianity? The only reason is because you happen to work out in the right religion. But then the goal, according to many, but not everyone agrees with that, is to use your knowledge to retrace those steps. Not to abandon the Emuna Pshuta, but to go deeper and to engage in the ontological, and the theological, and the Hasidic, and the Kabbalistic, each according to their own, to re-solidify. And ultimately, as one of the Gedolei Achronim, the Panim Eiros, tells us, this is what it says in Shemona Esrei. Elokeinu, Elokei Avoseinu. You're going backwards. Start with Elokei Avoseinu, that came first. No, that's not good enough. I know you got the Masorah from Elokei Avoseinu, but your job, to the extent that you're up to it, is to make it Elokeinu. And one of the ways is to make it Elokeinu is by deepening your Emuna. For some it will be philosophical study. For some it will be Kabbalistic study. And that, I believe, is the deeper level of what Reb Levi Yitzchak meant. Sprinza believes in God. I know God exists. And do you know why I know? Because I spent years with the Maggid. And now, when I exposed his teaching, I realized that Ein Od Milvado on the deepest level possible. Again, on the philosophical level, you'll see that the Rambam and Chazal is very into philosophical study. Others, Kuzari, Masorah. But even Masorah means knowing what it means to have a Masorah. I could have a Masorah about the Buddha Shemona. You have to understand what Masorah means. It means Masorah from national revelation. How do I know that God wants us to believe in this? Read the Bible. He says that again and again. You didn't get this just from your papa, right? You got it from revelation. This is very much part of our tradition, and even is included, I believe, in Emuna Pshuta. One final idea. I heard this from Hasidic writing, but I can't pinpoint it. There's a pasuk, I believe, in Tehillim Kuf Yutes that says, Chol mitzvosecha emuna. So on a simple level, it means all of your mitzvahs are faithful, meaning they're meaningful and they get us to eternity. But on a drash level, all of your mitzvahs are belief, meaning there are 612 additional ways to fulfill the first one. All of the mitzvahs are expressions of Emuna. The way the Sefer Koran puts it, Rav Yosef Albo, we don't have a chance to elaborate on this, that what is Emuna? What is the interrelationship between creed and deed? Every deed is informed by Emuna. When I put on tefillin, when I wear tzitzis, even when I give tzedakah, meaning whether it's b'nadam l'malkom, b'nadam l'chavero, it becomes a meaningful act. And that's what we were discussing before. No Emuna, no Olam Haba, because all your acts they're empty. They're only shells. I once heard an idea that someone who doesn't believe in God and gives charity, God gives him a reward in this world. Because that's his reality. He has no reality of God. But someone who's living eternity when they give tzedakah. Someone that's connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when they put on tefillin. So that leads to the ultimate eternity of Olam Haba, because the deed is informed by the Emunah. It's invested with that. Just like giving a gift to someone you love. It's not just by rote giving them a gift. It's informed by the connection. So Hashem should give us the ability to not only receive our traditions from sometimes only our rebellion, depending on which kind of family background you grew up in, but to be able, each in their own level, to deepen our appreciation. Ultimately, Emunah's connection, as they point out, Mama, Emunah, it's all about connection. It's that the child relies on the mother, just intuitively. Right? I heard a Darshan pointed out, and perhaps that's even why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created motherhood, to show you what that means, to totally rely on a being. Ultimately, relying on humans is frail, right? But we see that concept, and ultimately that's where we're headed. To ultimately see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives, certainly in our mitzvah performance, but throughout our lives, even in the quote-unquote mundane aspects of our lives. Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Sorry, it was late.
Thank you.